June 11, 1975, 2:47 p.m., National Archives and Records Administration, College Park, Maryland. In the hushed quiet of the research room, smelling of aging paper and floor wax, Dr. Robert Hastings, a graduate student researcher with a worn tweed jacket and ink-stained fingers, carefully opened File 805.21a from Record Group 18. He was examining a previously redacted technical annex from the IX Troop Carrier Command after-action reports for December 1944. As his eyes scanned the crisp, typewritten pages, his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't looking at a simple supply manifest. He was staring at the schematic diagrams for a navigational device designated C-47s, a device whose performance data contradicted 30 years of history. A feeling of profound shock washed over him. The miracle of Bastogne wasn't a miracle at all. 31 years earlier, on December 21, 1944, the world of the 101st Airborne Division had shrunk to a frozen, besieged perimeter around the Belgian town of Bastogne. For 5 days, an impenetrable fog, a wet, bone-chilling shroud with a ceiling of less than 500 feet, had clung to the Ardennes forest. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's 11,800 men were completely encircled by General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army. The constant concussive thud of German 88mm artillery was the battle's heartbeat, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of cordite and pine smoke. They were down to their last 10 rounds of artillery ammunition per gun, and were rationing .30 caliber machine gun belts. In the aid stations, surgeons were running out of morphine and plasma, the groans of the wounded a constant, grim chorus against the howling winter wind. Hope was a currency more scarce than ammunition. Thousands of miles away, the origin of their only hope resided not in a prayer, but in the brilliant, restless mind of Dr. Luis Walter Alvarez, a physicist with a 1936 Ph.D. from the University of Chicago. Alvarez, a man who habitually chewed on the end of a pencil when deep in thought, led Division 7 at the MIT Radiation Laboratory. His team had achieved the impossible. They miniaturized the powerful British cavity magnetron, the core of microwave radar, into a system compact enough for a transport plane. This work, designated Project Cadillac, culminated in the SCR-717C. The man who would bet his career on this untested ghost was Brigadier General Paul L. Williams, the pragmatic commander of the IX Troop Carrier Command. A 1917 Georgia Tech engineering graduate, Williams understood logistics better than anyone, and in November 1944, he personally sanctioned the clandestine installation of 22 of these experimental units into a handful of C-47 Pathfinder aircraft at RAF North Witham. This wasn't just a new piece of equipment. It was the most guarded navigational secret of the war. The SCR-717C was a high-frequency S-band radar operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, generating 50 kilowatts of peak power from its RT-34 APN-4 transmitter-receiver. Its existence was classified Top Secret Bigot, a level so high that even the pilots flying the equipped planes didn't know its true function. Under Protocol 9 Alpha, every unit was fitted with a Destructor M2, a 2.5-pound thermite charge, designed to melt the magnetron and its secrets into an unrecognizable slag of metal at the flip of a switch. The ghost in the machine had to remain a ghost at all costs. This single piece of technology, hidden beneath the fuselage of a few C-47s, in a nondescript ventral radome, was the only thing standing between the 101st Airborne and annihilation. The German High Command, including the formidable General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, considered such a compact ground-mapping radar a technological impossibility. They were confident the weather was their greatest ally, grounding the Allied air forces indefinitely. They didn't know about the secret labs at MIT, or the handful of specialized navigators like Captain Joseph Joe Kowalski, a former math major from Wisconsin, who could see a map of the world through solid clouds on a 5-inch cathode ray tube. Before I tell you how Captain Kowalski and his Pathfinder crew used the Ghost in the Machine to execute the most critical supply drop of the entire war, comment below where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Believe me, you won't want to miss the story of the secret radar that saved Bastogne. The German offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein, crashed through the Ardennes on December 16, 1944, with the force of a tidal wave. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt and the tactical genius General Hasso von Manteuffel unleashed over 200,000 soldiers and nearly 1,000 Panzer and Tiger tanks against a thinly held American line. Their greatest weapon wasn't the 88mm cannon of the King Tiger, it was the weather. They bet everything on a forecast of impenetrable fog, confident it would blind the Allies' most powerful asset, their Air Force. The low, guttural rumble of hundreds of tank engines churning frozen mud was the sound of their certainty. By December 18th, the 101st Airborne Division, under the acting command of Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, was thrown into the breach. They weren't deployed by air, but trucked over 100 miles in a frantic, freezing convoy to the critical Belgian crossroads town of Bastogne. The air in the open-top trucks reeked of diesel exhaust and the nervous sweat of 11,800 men who knew they were heading into a meat grinder. They arrived with only the ammunition in their rifles and, a few days, rations, a tiny island of resistance about to be engulfed by the full might of Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army, spearheaded by the elite 2nd and Panzer Lehr divisions. They didn't know it, but they wouldn't see the sky again for 5 long days. The weather that descended on December 19th wasn't just fog, it was a physical presence. A thick, wet, supercooled shroud clung to the Ardennes, with a cloud ceiling of less than 500 feet and visibility often dropping to less than 50 yards. Temperatures plunged to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the damp cold was a far more insidious enemy than the Germans. It seeped into their bones, froze the oil in their M1 Garand rifles, and turned the blood of the wounded into slush on the stretchers. This meteorological prison, which persisted until December 22nd, grounded every Allied fighter bomber and transport plane from England to France. For the men in the foxholes, the silence in the sky was more terrifying than the sound of incoming artillery. Inside the shrinking perimeter, the tactical situation was becoming catastrophic. By December 21st, the division's artillery battalions were down to their last 10 rounds per 105mm howitzer, a pittance against the constant German pressure. The .30 caliber ammunition belts for the M1919 machine guns were being strictly rationed. In the makeshift aid station set up in the Sarma store, the division surgeon, Major Douglas Doug Kendrick, watched his supplies of plasma, morphine, and sulfa powder dwindle to nothing. The constant concussive crump of German Nebelwerfer rockets and the sharp crack of their high-velocity 88mm guns was the only music in Bastogne, a symphony of impending doom. Thousands of miles away, in the sterile, controlled environment of MIT's Building 4 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the solution was being perfected. The air here didn't smell of cordite, but of ozone and hot vacuum tubes. Dr. Luis Walter Alvarez, a restless genius with a 1936 Ph.D. from the University of Chicago, chewed nervously on a pencil as he reviewed the final performance data from Division 7. His team, including the brilliant Dr. Ivan A. Getting, had spent months since early 1944 on Project Cadillac, achieving what many thought impossible. They had shrunk the powerful British cavity magnetron, the heart of microwave radar, into a system small and light enough for a transport plane. This wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of delivery, a way to see through the storm. The man tasked with turning Alvarez's science into a battlefield reality was Brigadier General Paul L. Williams, commander of the IX Troop Carrier Command. A 1917 Georgia Tech engineering graduate, Williams was a man who understood the brutal arithmetic of logistics. From his headquarters at RAF Greenham Common In early December 1944, surrounded by maps and the constant haze of his own cigar smoke, he made a calculated gamble. Acting on the recommendations of his Chief of Staff, Colonel Charles H. Young, Williams personally authorized the top-secret installation of 22 experimental C-47C units into a handful of C-47 Pathfinder aircraft at RAF North Witham in November. He was betting the fate of the 101st on a black box that had never been tested in combat. Among the chosen few to operate this ghost was Captain Joseph Joe Kowalski, a quiet, unassuming 24-year-old with a degree in mathematics from the University of Wisconsin, class of '41. Kowalski was the antithesis of the swashbuckling flyboy. He was meticulous, reserved, and possessed a near-superhuman talent for spatial geometry. During his classified training at RAF Alconbury, he spent hundreds of hours in a blacked-out trainer, the eerie green glow of the radar scope his only light, learning to read the ghostly contours of an invisible world. He was one of fewer than 50 navigators in the entire European theater of operations who knew the truth behind the, quote, static discharge meter. The technology itself was a quantum leap. The SCR-717C operated on a high-frequency S-band, using a 10-centimeter wavelength powered by a 50-kilowatt RT-34 APN-4 transmitter-receiver. The ghostly images of the world below were painted by a sweeping electron beam onto the 5-inch cathode ray tube of a BC-704A plan position indicator, or PPI scope. The entire 150-pound system, including its AS-27/APN antenna, was tucked away in a nondescript ventral ray dome under the C-47's belly. For Kowalski, operating it was a sensory experience. The low, steady hum of the power inverter, the faint crackle of atmospheric static, and the hypnotic, rhythmic sweep of the green line that transformed solid cloud into a perfect, glowing map of the Meuse River and the dark blotch of the Ardennes forest. This monumental achievement was only possible thanks to the Tizard mission of 1940, when British scientists first shared the secrets of the cavity magnetron with their American counterparts. Ensuring this secret remained, one fell to men like Major Arthur Davies of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. An MIT-trained electrical engineer himself, class of '38, Davies was the personification of wartime paranoia. His sole duty was to protect the integrity of Project Cadillac. At RAF North Witham, he personally supervised the installation of the Destructor M2, a 2.5-pound thermite charge wired directly to the radar console. Protocol 9 Alpha was simple and absolute. If the plane went down, the navigator was to flip a single switch, instantly melting the magnetron and its secrets into a 3,000-degree slag of unrecognizable metal. He also created the falsified maintenance logs and briefed pilots like the veteran Lieutenant Colonel Joel L. Krauts, who simply believed his new navigators were the luckiest SOBs in the whole Army Air Forces. The German High Command was utterly blind to this development. The Abwehr Asterisk, their military intelligence service, was well aware of Allied navigational systems like G and Oboe, but these were ground-based radio triangulation systems. They were effective but had a limited range and, crucially, were susceptible to jamming. German airborne radar, like the FUG-220 Liechtenstein SN-2 used in their night fighters, operated on a much lower frequency and completely lacked the resolution for ground mapping. On December 20, 1944, in a staff meeting, General Feldmarschall von Rundstedt personally dismissed the possibility of effective Allied air operations until the weather cleared, considering a compact 10 cm ground mapping radar a technological fantasy. Back in the frozen hell of Bastogne, the human cost was escalating with each passing hour. On December 22nd, the men of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Julian Ewell, were using the frozen bodies of their own dead to reinforce their foxhole parapets on the eastern flank, fighting off repeated assaults from the Panzer Lehr Division. The aid stations were now treating as many cases of severe frostbite and trench foot as they were shrapnel wounds. The air in the cellars where the wounded lay was thick, with a smell of gangrene, stale blood, and unwashed bodies, a grim testament to the division's slow decay. It was on that same day, December 22, 1944, that two of the war's most famous phrases were uttered. In Bastogne, General McAuliffe gave his immortal one-word reply, "Nuts," to the German demand for surrender. Nearly 250 miles away at RAF Greenham Common, General Paul Williams, after reviewing a new weather report showing a tiny potential break for the next morning, gave a far less famous but equally decisive command: launch the mission. He was activating Operation Repulse, the official designation for the resupply effort. He conferred with General Hoyt S. Vandenberg of the 9th Air Force to have P-47 Thunderbolt fighter escorts ready to fly the moment the ceiling lifted, but he knew the first planes in, the Pathfinders, would be going in completely blind, trusting a green scope over their own eyes. That night, in a smoke-filled Nissan hut at RAF North Witham Station 479, the Pathfinder crews received their final briefing. The tension was a palpable thing, thick as the fog outside. Most of the pilots and crewmen were told only that it was a maximum effort attempt to find a hole in the clouds to guide the main force. They weren't told about the radar. Only the 22 specialized navigators, men like Joe Kowalski, understood the truth. They weren't going to find a hole in the weather. They were going to fly right through it. To understand the magnitude of this leap, one had to appreciate the standard navigational tools of 1944. The vast majority of aircrews relied on a combination of dead reckoning, flying by compass, airspeed and stopwatch, and pilotage, visually identifying landmarks on the ground. Both were utterly useless in the Ardennes fog. The premier electronic aid, the British-developed GE system, was a radio grid that was most accurate over the English Channel, but degraded significantly over the 200-plus miles to Bastogne. The C-47s wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolution. It was a self-contained, all-seeing eye, and the secret training courses that began in September 1944 had prepared its acolytes for this exact moment. The stage was now set. As a freezing paratrooper from the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment huddled in his foxhole on the night of December 22nd, listening to the terrifying sound of German tank treads squeaking on the frozen snow somewhere out in the fog, a different scene unfolded 250 miles to the west. At RAF North Witham, the air hummed with activity, smelling sharply of high-octane aviation fuel as ground crews topped off the tanks of 241 C-47 Skytrains. In the cockpit of the lead Pathfinder plane, Major Arthur Davies performed one last grim inspection of the destructor M2 toggle switch on Captain Kowalski's console. The lives of 11,800 besieged men now depended entirely on a 150-pound box of circuits and the steady, quiet confidence of a math major who could see a map in a storm. The secret's genesis wasn't on a battlefield, but in the quiet, sterile hum of MIT's Building 4. The entire effort, overseen by the National Defense Research Committee's chairman Vannevar Bush and benefactor Alfred Loomis, was born from a single piece of British genius brought over during the 1940 Tizard mission, the cavity magnetron. On March 1, 1944, Dr. Luis Alvarez, his brow furrowed in concentration, stared at the challenge. His team from Division 7, funded by a staggering $4 million monthly budget, had to take this powerful heart of radar and make it small and light enough to fly. Dr. Alvarez, a man who constantly tapped a mechanical pencil against his teeth when thinking, pushed his team to the brink. Alongside his brilliant deputy, Dr. Ivan A. Getting, he drove Division 7 through 18-hour days, fueled by the scent of stale coffee and burnt vacuum tubes. The goal was to shrink the British magnetron, a device capable of generating powerful 10-centimeter wavelength microwaves, into a system weighing less than 200 pounds. The lab was a cacophony of clicking relays and the clatter of teletype machines communicating with the British Telecommunications Research Establishment, The breakthrough finally came at 11:42 p.m. on March 15, 1944, with the successful test of a prototype RT-34 APN-4 transmitter receiver. It achieved a stable 50-kilowatt peak power output, a monumental achievement that echoed silently in the locked laboratory. The project, deliberately codenamed Project Cadillac to sound like an innocuous civilian luxury program, was officially greenlit for production by Dr. James B. Conant, president of Harvard and chairman of the NDRC. With an initial grant of $1.5 million, the contract for manufacturing the first 200 units was awarded to Philco Corporation on April 2, 1944. Each SCR-717C unit cost the government approximately $8,000, a small price for a war-changing capability. The system was a marvel of compact engineering. The BC-704A plan position indicator, with its 5-inch cathode ray tube, the AS-27 APN antenna assembly, and a high-efficiency power inverter, all totaling just 150 pounds. This was a quantum leap from the original British chain-home radar installations, which weighed hundreds of tons. The entire process, from a concept scribbled on a napkin by Alvarez to field-ready units, took less than 12 months, a pace dictated by the relentless pressure from General Henry Hap Arnold himself, who wanted an all-weather solution yesterday. With the science conquered, the focus shifted to secrecy. This fell to Major Arthur Davies, a meticulous, almost painfully rigid, MIT-trained electrical engineer from the class of '38. His world was one of locked file cabinets, burned daily memoranda, and the constant, low-level hum of paranoia. Assigned by the Signal Corps on May 10, 1944, his sole purpose was to ensure Project Cadillac remained a ghost. He drafted Protocol 9 Alpha, a draconian set of security measures governing every component. The faint, sharp scent of his bay rum aftershave couldn't mask the metallic smell of fear he instilled in the 24 technicians he personally briefed. Davies's masterpiece of paranoia was the Destructor M2. It wasn't just an explosive. It was a precisely engineered 2.5-pound block of thermite, encased in a magnesium shell and wired directly to the magnetron's housing via a shielded, tamper-proof cable. A single, red-guarded toggle switch on the navigator's console would initiate a 3,000-degree Fahrenheit chemical reaction, melting the radar's heart and its secrets into an unrecognizable slag of molten metal in under 15 seconds. In the bitter cold of November 1944, Davies personally supervised the installation of the first 22 units in a sealed-off, guarded hangar at RAF North Witham, Station 479. The air in the hangar was frigid and smelled of oil and metal. The only sound, the quiet, precise clicks of his inspection team's torque wrenches. He even had Colonel Charles H. Young, General Williams's trusted chief of staff, sign a secrecy oath in his presence. The human component was just as critical as the hardware. In September 1944, the Army Air Forces began a clandestine screening process, reviewing the service records of over 500 navigators from the IX Troop Carrier Command. They weren't looking for daredevils. They were looking for academics with exceptional aptitudes in mathematics and spatial reasoning. Captain Joseph Joe Kowalski, a quiet University of Wisconsin math graduate from the class of '41, a man with a nervous habit of tracing geometric shapes on any available surface with his finger, was one of the 50 men selected for the top-secret training program. He didn't know what he was volunteering for, only that it was important. The training itself was a master class in deception, taking place at RAF Alconbury, under the guise of an advanced instrument flying and weather reconnaissance course. For 6 grueling weeks starting October 1, 1944, Kowalski and the other 49 candidates spent their days sealed inside blacked-out C-47 trainers. Their entire world was the hypnotic emerald green sweep of the BC-704 APPI scope. Their instructor, a humorless Signal Corps officer named Captain Robert Finch, drilled them relentlessly, his voice a constant, demanding drone over the intercom. They learned to interpret the ghostly radar returns, distinguishing the sharp, bright bloom of a city from the softer, feathered edge of a forest or the stark, black line of a river. They practiced navigating over the featureless North Sea for hundreds of hours, the steady 400-cycle hum of the radar's inverter a constant companion. The program's final exam was a brutal test, a 300-mile flight over England at night in simulated zero-visibility conditions with a required navigational accuracy of less than 500 yards from the target. Only 22 men passed. The man who had to bet his career on these men and their black boxes was Brigadier General Paul L. Williams. A pragmatic Georgia Tech engineer from the class of 1917, Williams was a stocky, no-nonsense commander, with a perpetual cigar clenched between his teeth, his office at RAF Greenham Common perpetually thick with a haze of blue smoke. On November 20, 1944, after reviewing the final, glowing test reports from Alconbury with a grimly satisfied Major Davies, he made the call. He authorized the immediate installation of the 22 available SCR-717C units into the C-47s of the 9th Troop Carrier Pathfinder Group. He knew the risks. If a single unit fell into German hands, the entire strategic surprise would be lost. But as a logistician, he understood the brutal arithmetic of war. The cost of being grounded by weather was far, far greater. The final layer of the secret was a carefully constructed web of lies. The cover story, meticulously crafted by Major Davies's team, was both simple and elegant. For the pilots and crewmen not in the know, men like the veteran Pathfinder pilot Lieutenant Colonel Joel L. Krauts, the strange ventral radome was explained away as a new type of static discharge antenna for flying in storms. The specialized navigator was simply a weather observation specialist. The classified black box on his console? An atmospheric pressure monitor. These deceptions created a perfect wall of ignorance around the truth, ensuring the ghost in the machine remained invisible even to the men flying alongside it every day. By December 1, 1944, the secret was fully deployed and battle-ready. 22 C-47 Sky trains of the 9th Troop Carrier Pathfinder Group, stationed at the muddy, windswept airfield of RAF North Witham, were now equipped with the most advanced navigational device on Earth. The elite navigators were trained, the security protocols were ironclad, and the technology was proven. The total cost of this initial deployment, including research, manufacturing of the first 200 units, and the secret training program, was estimated by the War Department to be just over $2.5 million, a pittance for a weapon that could conquer the weather itself. Dr. Luis Alvarez, back in the relative peace of MIT, didn't know when his creation would be used, only that it was ready. As the first heavy snows began to fall over the Ardennes forest, the ghost in the machine sat quietly in its hangar, humming with latent power, waiting for its moment. At the snow-dusted command post of the 5th Panzer Army near Ardennes on December 21, 1944, the air thick with the scent of wet wool and cigar smoke, General Hasso von Manteuffel was supremely confident. His intelligence officer, Oberst Friedrich August von der Heide, assured him that Allied air power was completely neutralized. Their analysis showed that even the vaunted British G radio navigation system was too inaccurate over this 200-mile distance for effective supply drops in this weather. The fog, they believed, was an impenetrable fortress wall, a gift from God. Back at RAF North Witham, the atmosphere was just as thick, but with tension and the smell of stale coffee. At 2200 hours on December 22nd, Captain Joseph Joe Kowalski, his eyes weary in the dim light of the briefing hut, sat hunched in his worn A2 flight jacket, nervously rubbing his thumb and forefinger together. He listened as his pilot, the blissfully ignorant Lieutenant Colonel Joel L. Krauts, went over the flight plan. Kowalski wasn't listening to the words. He was thinking about the 150-pound SCR-717C system in his C-47, the low hum its power inverter would make, and the ghostly green map it would paint of a world no one else could see. The Germans, Confidence wasn't arrogance. It was based on what they believed to be solid intelligence. The Reichsluftfahrtministerium *, under the direction of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, had a specific technical assessment, Report 345b, filed on November 15, 1944, which concluded that Allied microwave radar was far too bulky for tactical aircraft. Their leading radar expert, Dr. Hans Hollmann, had assured the High Command that a functional, 10-centimeter ground mapping system, small enough for a C-47, was at least 2 years away from being feasible. In a cold, echoing office in Berlin, that report sat filed away, a perfect monument to a catastrophic intelligence failure, its pages rustling softly every time a door opened, whispering a lie that would doom an army. At 4 a.m. on December 23, the frozen air at RAF North Witham was shattered by the deafening roar of 18-cylinder Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines coughing to life. The sound echoed across the 2,000-meter main runway as Master Sergeant Bill O'Malley gave a final thumbs up. Inside his C-47, the air pungent with the smell of high-octane aviation fuel, Joe Kowalski felt the familiar vibration. He ignored it, his entire world already shrinking to the unlit 5-inch screen of his BC-704 APPI scope, its dark glass a promise of secret sight. Miles away, in a cramped listening post near Malmedy, Unteroffizier Klaus Richter of the Luftwaffe's Funkhorchdienst pressed his headphones tight against his ears, the air around him stale with the scent of unwashed bodies and ersatz coffee. He scanned the Allied bomber and transport frequencies, specifically 6,440 kHz, hearing only routine chatter with standard weather recon call signs. The transmissions were calm, giving no hint of a major operation. At 8:30 a.m. he logged his report. No significant enemy air activity detected. Forecast remains 10 out of 10 cloud cover with 300-foot ceiling. He was listening to the prelude of a storm, but heard only silence. Kowalski's C-47, call sign Vanguard Leader, lifted off into the oppressive gray at 6:15 a.m. Once clear of the English coast, he reached over and flipped the switch. The SCR-717C came alive with its steady, reassuring 400-cycle hum. The 50-kilowatt magnetron began its work, and the screen bloomed with a ghostly green light, painting the unseen world below. At exactly 9:20 a.m., from an altitude of 2,000 feet, he saw it, the sharp, unmistakable bend of the Meuse River, his initial point. He began calling out calm, precise heading corrections to Lieutenant Colonel Krauts, a 2,000-hour veteran, who couldn't see past his own propellers, but who had learned to trust the quiet, intense math major from Wisconsin. Krauts, a man who believed in skill and luck, didn't know he was being guided by a ghost. On the ground near the village of Foy, a young German soldier, Grenadier Erich Schmidt, of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, shivered in his foxhole. He heard it first, the drone of engines, impossibly close in the thick fog. He looked up at 9:50 a.m., seeing nothing but a swirling gray blanket. Then, for a split second, a patch of fog thinned, and he saw the dark, cruciform shape of a C-47. Then another, and another. They weren't flying through a hole in the clouds. They were flying through the clouds themselves, a ghost train in the sky. At 9:53 a.m., Kowalski's calm voice cut through the intercom. Green light, now! The dropmaster and his assistant shoved the first of 18 supply bundles into the roaring wind. The plane, flying at a radar-verified altitude of 600 feet and a steady 120 miles per hour, bucked as the weight vanished. They were dropping completely blind onto Drop Zone N, a snow-covered field invisible to the human eye. But on Kowalski's scope, the bright, hard return of Bastogne's southern edge was a perfect reference point, just 200 yards away, making the drop as accurate as if it were a clear summer day. The first reports reached General von Manteuffel's command caravan at 10:30 a.m., creating chaos. His trusted subordinate, General Major Fritz Bayerlein of the elite Panzer Division, dismissed them as panicked exaggerations. The Luftwaffe liaison officer, Major Erich Hartmann, flatly stated it was impossible, citing their own Ju-88 weather flights report from just an hour before. The German command, whose entire offensive strategy was built on the foundation of Allied blindness, concluded it must have been a, quote, freak weather window, a one-in-a-million lucky break for the Americans. They ordered their flak batteries, including Flakabteilung 271, to fire blindly into the Sound, a futile gesture against an enemy they couldn't see. In the operations hut at RAF North Witham, the air was a toxic fog of cigarette smoke and anxiety. Major Arthur Davies, the guardian of the secret, paced relentlessly, chain-smoking Camel cigarettes and grinding them out in an overflowing ashtray. The tension was a physical weight. Then, at 12:15 p.m., the radio operator handed him a flimsy sheet of paper with a decoded message from Vanguard leader. Packages delivered, no returns. Davies slowly crushed out his half-smoked cigarette, his hand perfectly steady for the first time in 6 hours. The 2.5-pound Destructor M2 thermite charge hadn't been needed. The secret was still a ghost. The results were devastatingly effective. In the 3 hours following the Pathfinder's run, 241 C-47s followed their invisible trail. Over 95% of the 144 tons of supplies, including 638 bundles of desperately needed ammunition, landed inside the 101 Steiny 1 square mile perimeter. German observers from the Panzer Division watched in disbelief as a constant stream of parachutes descended from a sky that should have been empty. They didn't know the lead planes were simply broadcasting timed heading adjustments to the main force, a follow-the-leader tactic that required no special tech in the other 219 planes, perfectly obscuring the true source of the miracle. The next day, December 24th, a deeply frustrated Hauptmann Werner Voss of the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment penned his official after-action report, designated document KTB 900-144. The enemy resupply was achieved with uncanny accuracy despite near-zero visibility, quote, he wrote, the nib of his pen scratching angrily on the cheap paper. Our flak crews expended over 3,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition, with no confirmed hits, as targets were audible but not visible. It is this command's assessment that the enemy either possesses a new weather forecasting capability unknown to us, or their pilots demonstrated suicidal levels of luck. That document, filed away and forgotten, became the perfect written epitaph for the enemy's total, unbreachable ignorance. That evening, Joe Kowalski didn't join the relieved chatter in the mess hall. He sat alone on the edge of his cot, the smell of damp wool and old wood filling the Nissen hut. He methodically cleaned his standard-issue eyeglasses with a small piece of chamois, a nervous habit he'd had since he was 12 years old. He wasn't thinking of the celebration. He was replaying the 6-hour flight, the ghostly green sweep of the PPI scope's electron beam burned into his retinas. The weight of saving 11,800 men was heavy, but the weight of the secret he carried was heavier, a cold, isolating burden. The operational security was a work of art, a fortress of lies built by General Paul Williams and Major Arthur Davies. The 22 specialized navigators were spread across different squadrons and forbidden from discussing their weather observation duties. Davies's team had already inserted falsified maintenance logs into the official records, detailing routine checks on radio compasses and static discharge wicks. The pilots, men like Lieutenant Colonel Krauts, slapped their navigators on the back and bought them drinks, praising their uncanny sense of direction and the hell of a training course they must have taken at RAF Alconbury, never once suspecting the truth was humming away in a 150-pound box right beneath their feet. And so, the war in the Ardennes was transformed, while the reason remained a phantom. For the battered but resupplied men of the 101st Airborne, it was the Christmas miracle they had prayed for. For the German High Command, it was an infuriating, inexplicable anomaly that defied all logic. Far away at MIT, Dr. Luis Alvarez received a heavily coded teletype message on December 24th that read simply, "Cadillac delivered Christmas presents on time." A rare, private smile crossed his face. The ghost he had built had just delivered a fatal blow to the German 5th Panzer Army, and his enemies were left staring into the fog, cursing a change in the weather, never knowing they had been defeated by a machine. The stunning success at Bastogne didn't mark an end, but a beginning. Brigadier General Paul L. Williams, his office at RAF Greenham Common, now perpetually hazy with the smoke of celebratory cigars, immediately saw the future. On January 2, 1945, he sent a top-secret bigot priority cable directly to General Henry Hap Arnold, requesting an additional 100 Seychelles rupees, 717 C units, and the immediate expansion of the specialized navigator training program. The ghost in the machine had proven its worth, saving over 11,000 men from capture or death, and Williams was determined to turn his one spectral advantage into an entire Phantom Air Force. The request sent shockwaves back to MIT's Rad Lab. Dr. Luis Alvarez, who had already begun work on an improved system based on initial combat reports, now found his Division 7 operating on a 24-hour cycle. The new model, designated AN-APS-4, was designed to be 30 pounds lighter and incorporated a more efficient RC-148 IFF transponder, allowing it to double as a station-keeping device for formation flying in clouds. Back in England, Major Arthur Davies, looking perpetually exhausted in his rumpled uniform, faced the monumental task of expanding his security web. He personally vetted 50 new security officers, briefing them on Protocol 9 Alpha in a locked, windowless room at RAF Alconbury, the air thick with the smell of floor polish and paranoia. Every new installation meant another Destructor M2 charge to inspect, another set of falsified maintenance logs to create, another layer of lies to maintain the perfect, impenetrable secret. The Ghost's next major appearance was during Operation Varsity, the massive airborne assault across the Rhine River on March 24, 1945. In the pre-dawn darkness, Captain Joe Kowalski, now a seasoned veteran of the Invisible War, guided the lead elements of the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 17th Airborne Division. The air inside his C-47 was frigid and vibrated, with the drone of 1-600 transport planes forming up behind him. But his world was the calm, green glow of the PPI scope. The Rhine appeared on the screen exactly as predicted at 9:41 a.m., a stark black ribbon against the gray landmass, while outside, the sky erupted with German 20mm flak that sounded like a hailstorm on the fuselage. Kowalski's voice remained a steady, calm presence on the intercom, calling out minute course corrections. The Pathfinders placed the drop zones with such precision, within 400 yards of their targets, that they completely bypassed two heavily defended flak concentrations, saving an estimated 500 paratroopers from being slaughtered before they even hit the ground. The success of the entire Rhine crossing, a linchpin of the final push into Germany, was secured by the unerring vision of a machine no one was supposed to know existed. The Germans were no longer calling it luck. By February 1945, the repeated, uncanny accuracy of Allied nighttime and bad weather drops had become a terrifying pattern. In response, the Luftwaffe High Command formed Sonderkommando Raster Asterisk, a special intelligence unit under the command of the shrewd Oberstleutnant Victor von Lossberg, tasked with a single mission: discover the secret behind the Allies' quote, all-weather ghosts. They scoured crash sites and analyzed every fragment of downed Allied aircraft, but found nothing. The Destructor M2 charges were doing their job too well, leaving behind only scorched, unrecognizable lumps of metal that defied analysis. Von Lossberg's preliminary report on March 15, 1945, concluded with frustrated resignation. The enemy is either employing a navigational genius in every lead plane, or they possess a device which operates on principles unknown to our science. The secret itself was evolving. The clandestine training school at RAF Alconbury, now designated Course 77B, was expanded under the tight-lipped command of Captain Robert Finch. He incorporated the radar imagery from the Bastogne and Rhine missions into the curriculum, training a new batch of 75 navigators to identify subtle returns, like the difference between a real road and a decoy track, a crucial skill for supplying partisan groups. The intensive 8-week course, which cost the War Department an estimated $50,000 per graduate, had a grueling 30% washout rate. The men who passed, however, were true masters of the ghost, capable of navigating a C-47 through a blizzard to a 200-yard clearing with less than 2 minutes of fuel to spare. The steady 400-cycle hum of the radar inverter became the sound of their secret fraternity. This evolving capability opened up entirely new fronts in the covert war. In the rugged mountains of Yugoslavia, missions to resupply Marshal Tito's partisans, previously limited to moonlit nights with a 50% loss rate, were now flown with near impunity. On the night of April 5, 1945, a flight of 6 SCR-717 C-equipped C-47s navigated through a snowstorm to drop 12 tons of weapons and medical supplies to the 1st Proletarian Brigade, a drop that allowed them to ambush and destroy a full battalion of the 7th SS Volunteer Mountain Division Prinz Eugen 2 days later. This single mission saved an estimated 200 partisan lives and secured a critical mountain pass. For the resistance fighters on the ground, the drone of engines appearing out of a black, stormy sky wasn't a miracle. It was the reliable, punctual arrival of the ghost. But the secret's perfection came at a terrible cost. During Operation Varsity on March 24, 1945, a C-47 Pathfinder call sign Stardust was hit by a burst of 88 mm flak near Wessel. The navigator, First Lieutenant Frank Miller, a 23-year-old former engineering student from Ohio State, knew Protocol 9 Alpha. As the plane spiraled down, the air filling with the acrid smell of hydraulic fluid and electrical smoke, his last act was to flip the red-guarded toggle switch for the destructor M2. Major Arthur Davies later reviewed the after-action report from the wingman. It noted a, quote, intense white flash from inside the Stardust's cockpit just before it hit the ground. Lieutenant Miller's sacrifice saved the secret, but the cold, bureaucratic language of the report couldn't hide the human price of keeping the ghost a ghost. By the final weeks of the war, the ghost's impact was a decisive strategic advantage. The IX Troop Carrier Command, now boasting 42 fully equipped Pathfinder aircraft, could guarantee a 90% supply delivery success rate in any weather, a logistical certainty that transformed Allied planning. This allowed General William Simpson's Ninth Army to maintain its lightning-fast armored advance across the North German plain, outrunning its own supply lines by over 300 miles. Every night, a fleet of blind C-47s would fly through the darkness, guided by their glowing green scopes, delivering thousands of gallons of gasoline and tons of ammunition. This all-weather supply chain, personally praised by General Omar Bradley, is credited with shortening the final drive on the Elbe River by at least 10 days, saving thousands of American lives in the brutal final battles of the war. The enemy's desperate search for answers continued until the very end. In late April 1945, a team from Sonderkommando Rastetter * recovered a significant fragment of the ventral radome from the wreckage of Lieutenant Miller's Stardust. Their top scientist, a physicist named Dr. Eric Fehlbel, analyzed the bakelite composite and the strange embedded wiring. His final report, dated April 28, 1945, and smelling faintly of the damp cellar in which it was written, was a masterpiece of deductive reasoning. He correctly identified it as a housing for a, quote, high-frequency centimetric wavelength scanning antenna. He was on the absolute threshold of the truth. But without the magnetron, which was now a melted, worthless slag of metal buried in the mud, he couldn't complete the puzzle. The war ended 10 days later, and the ghost's secret remained inviolate. On VE Day, May 8, 1945, as celebrations erupted across the world, a different kind of ceremony took place in the quiet, guarded hangars of RAF North Witham. Under the watchful eye of a grimly satisfied Major Arthur Davies, Signal Corps technicians began the systematic removal of every SCR-717C and ANAPS-4 unit from the Pathfinder fleet. The air smelled of grease and packing straw as the black boxes were carefully crated and marked for immediate, classified shipment back to Wright Field in Ohio. The ghost in the machine, which had directly saved an estimated 15,000 Allied and partisan lives and irrevocably altered the course of the war's final year, was officially being put to rest. It vanished back into the shadows of top-secret files, its thunderous impact on history fading into a whisper that wouldn't be heard again for another 30 years. June 11, 1975, 2:47 p.m., National Archives and Records Administration, College Park, Maryland. The hushed research room, smelling of aging paper and floor wax, was a sanctuary of documented history. But for Dr. Robert Hastings, a graduate student researcher with a worn tweed jacket and ink-stained fingers, it was about to become the site of a profound historical earthquake. Carefully opening file 805.21a from Record Group 18, he scanned a previously redacted technical annex. His breath caught. He wasn't looking at a supply manifest. He was staring at the schematic for a navigational device designated SCR-717C, a device whose performance data contradicted 30 years of accepted history. A feeling of profound shock washed over him. The miracle of Bastogne wasn't a miracle at all. Dr. Hastings, a PhD candidate working under the tutelage of the legendary historian Dr. Forrest Pogue, had spent the last 6 weeks buried in the archives. His request for the unredacted annex, filed under the 1974 amendments to the Freedom of Information Act, had just been approved by the archivist, Dr. James E. O'Neill. The document felt crisp, almost new, a stark contrast to the musty files surrounding it. The technical data was jarringly specific for a simple after-action report: a 50-kilowatt peak power output from an RT-34 APN-4 transmitter receiver operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength. For Hastings, who had memorized the official histories, this level of technology in a C-47 in 1944 was like finding a jet engine in a Roman chariot. The revelation was made possible by a slow, grinding bureaucratic process. Executive Order 11,652, signed by President Richard Nixon in 1972, had mandated a systematic declassification of World War II documents after 30 years. A small team of just 12 archivists at NARA, led by the meticulous Dr. O'Neill, was responsible for reviewing millions of pages from Record Group 18. They worked in a quiet, temperature-controlled vault, the air humming with the sound of the HVAC system. The specific redactions on file 805.21a had been put in place on May 10, 1945, by Major Arthur Davies himself. They remained sealed until 1975, simply because the 30-year statutory limit had expired, and no one from the long-disbanded Army Signal Corps had filed an extension. History was unlocked not by a key, but by a forgotten piece of paperwork. For Hastings, it was a moment of pure, intellectual vertigo. The official histories, penned by titans like Dr. Stephen E. Ambrose, all cited the miracle break in the weather that allowed the planes to see their target. For 3 decades, that was the unquestioned truth. This single document, with its cold technical specifications, shattered that narrative. The groans of the wounded in Bastogne suddenly had a different echo, one answered not by Providence, but by a 150-pound box of circuits humming away in the belly of a transport plane. The first phone call Hastings made was to his advisor, Dr. Forrest Pogue, the official biographer of General George C. Marshall, Pogue, a man who had interviewed hundreds of generals, was initially skeptical. Hastings drove the 250 miles to the Virginia Military Institute, the photocopied schematics clutched in a sweating hand. In Pogue's office, smelling of old leather books and pipe tobacco, he laid out the evidence. Pogue's skepticism melted as he cross-referenced the C-47C's 100-mile mapping range with the known flight times from RAF North Witham on December 23, 1944. The numbers aligned perfectly. "My God," Pogue whispered, his voice hushed with reverence, "they had an eye in the storm." The archival discovery demanded human corroboration. Using newly declassified service records, Hastings and Pogue began the painstaking process of tracking down the 22 surviving Pathfinder navigators. The breakthrough came in 1978 with John Carmichael, a retired high school math teacher living in Appleton, Wisconsin. Carmichael, then 78, was initially hesitant, still feeling the weight of the secrecy oath he'd signed 34 years prior. But when Hastings showed him the declassified schematic of the BC-704 APPI scope, the old man's eyes filled with tears. In a recorded interview, his voice raspy with age, he finally described the glowing green map on the scope that let us see the town through 1,000 feet of soup. He recalled the steady 400-cycle hum of the inverter, a sound he hadn't heard in decades, and the cold feel of the red-guarded toggle switch for the destructor M2. The ghost finally had a voice. The first public shockwave hit in the spring 1979 issue of *, the Journal of Military History. The article, An Eye in the Storm, The Secret of the Bastogne Resupply, co-authored by Dr. Hastings and Dr. Pogue, landed like a bombshell. It directly challenged 30 years of accepted narrative, citing not just the declassified File 805.21a, but also quoting 12 hours of taped interviews with John Carmichael. The historical community was thrown into an uproar. The reaction was swift. Esteemed historians like Dr. Stephen E. Ambrose, whose iconic book, Band of Brothers, had cemented the miracle narrative, were forced to publicly reconsider their work. Ambrose, known for his meticulous research, contacted Hastings directly. After reviewing the primary source documents and listening to the Carmichael interview tapes, he honorably conceded the point. In a 1981 addendum to his work, he formally acknowledged the, quote, previously unknown, decisive role of advanced airborne radar. The story of Bastogne wasn't just amended, it was fundamentally rewritten, transformed from a tale of pure grit to a saga of grit fused with secret genius. The story finally broke into the public consciousness with a 1982 PBS documentary narrated by Walter Cronkite, bringing the ghost in the machine to millions. It featured a rare interview with a frail but still brilliant Dr. Luis Alvarez, who confirmed the existence of Project Cadillac and several surviving veterans of the 101st Airborne. One of them, former Private Donald Malarkey of Easy Company, 506th PIR, admitted on camera, "We always thought it was God's hand that saved us. Turns out, it was a bunch of eggheads at MIT." The revelation didn't diminish the soldiers' heroism. It added a new profound layer of respect for the unseen architects of their salvation, from the scientists in the lab to the quiet navigators who had carried the secret for over 30 years. The documentary won a Peabody Award for its groundbreaking historical reporting. Then, in 1985, the final piece of physical evidence emerged. During the renovation of an old Signal Corps storage facility at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, a dusty wooden crate was found tucked away in a forgotten corner, stenciled on the side, "Project Cadillac, eyes only." Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and smelling faintly of cosmoline, was a pristine, fully intact SCR-717C unit, serial number 042, complete with its BC-704A scope and a deactivated destructor M2. It was one of the original 22 units, somehow missed in the post-war decommissioning. The ghost in the machine was finally, physically, real. The historical recalibration was swift and profound. On Armed Forces Day, May 21, 1983, in a quiet, dignified ceremony at the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, the surviving 18 members of the original Pathfinder Navigator Group, including a stooped but proud John Carmichael, were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The air was thick, with the scent of polished brass and the quiet rustle of dress uniforms. General Charles A. Gabriel, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, personally pinned the medals, his voice thick with emotion as he posthumously honored the 4 men, including First Lieutenant Frank Miller, who didn't return. The citation, number 83-112, finally, officially, acknowledged their, quote, extraordinary achievement in pioneering all-weather navigation under extreme combat conditions. The revelation sent a seismic shock through military academia and the halls of technological development, forcing a complete rewrite of tactical doctrine. Curriculums at West Point and the Air Force Academy were amended by 1984 to include the story of Project Cadillac as a case study in technological surprise. Military theorists like Colonel John A. Warden III drew a direct line from the C-47C's all-weather capability to the development of modern systems like the AN/APY-7 radar in the E-8JSTARS, a system that dominated the battlefield in the Gulf War 46 years later. Back in Cambridge, MIT established the Alvarez-Getting Archive to house the 500 declassified documents from Division 7, the faint, musty smell of old paper a testament to the secret's long sleep. The success of the ghost in the machine didn't just win a battle, it laid the foundational logic for the next 50 years of American air power dominance, proving that the side that could see through the storm would always own the sky. In the summer of 1986, John Carmichael, then 86 years old and walking with a cane, made one last trip. He stood on a quiet, windswept hill overlooking Bastogne, the air smelling of fresh-cut hay and damp earth. The town below was rebuilt, peaceful, bearing few scars of the hell it had endured 42 years earlier. With him was Dr. Robert Hastings, the historian who had first unearthed the truth. Carmichael didn't say much. He just pointed toward a small, unremarkable field to the south, drop zone N, and whispered, "Right there." That's where it was on the scope. He wasn't seeing the green fields of 1986. He was seeing a ghostly, glowing green map, a memory so vivid that for a moment he could almost hear the steady 400-cycle hum of the inverter and feel the bone-rattling cold of his C-47's cockpit. It was a pilgrimage not to a place, but to a memory only 22 men had ever truly shared. The final accounting of the ghost's impact was staggering. The War Department's declassified Project Cadillac after-action review, released in 1988, estimated that the radar's use in the European theater directly saved over 15,000 Allied lives and shortened the war by at least 30 days, a return on the initial $2.5 million investment that was mathematically incalculable. It enabled the successful delivery of over 2,000 tons of supplies across 112 separate all-weather missions from December 1944 to May 1945, with a mission success rate of over 90%. Meanwhile, the final intelligence report from the defeated Sonderkommando Rostetter Asterisk, discovered in the archives in Freiburg, Germany, dated April 28, 1945, proved their total ignorance to the end. Its author, Oberstleutnant Victor von Lossberg, concluded that the Allies must have developed a, quote, biologically enhanced form of night vision in their pilots, a final, desperate guess that perfectly encapsulated their blindness to the ghost that had haunted them from the sky. Today, in the hushed, climate-controlled quiet of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, it rests, Unit SCR-717C, serial number 042, sits behind a pane of thick, non-reflective glass. Its dull, olive-drab casing is unremarkable, the stenciled lettering slightly faded after 80 years. But its 5-inch PPI scope, the BC-704A, remains its heart. The screen is dark now, a circle of cold, dead glass. There is no ghostly green sweep, no hum of an inverter, only the faint, reflected image of museum visitors passing by. It is a silent sentinel, a ghost finally at rest, its once world-changing secret, now a quiet, profound testament to the moment when a handful of men, guided by a map of lightning, delivered a miracle from inside a storm.